Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome if you're new. My name is Declan and thanks so much for joining me for tonight's video. If you are new, then be sure to check out my Weird World Mystery Videos playlist right here on my channel. I've covered so many interesting cases that there's so much for you to enjoy. Tonight's video is a tale that takes us all the way back to the 60s. It's a job that's taken months to plan, minutes to execute, and a lifetime to figure out. You are watching Weird World and this is Escaping Alcatraz. Grab a snack and get ready because this one is a hell of a story. Alcatraz, one of the most notorious prisons in the world, known for its tough reputation. The prison was isolated on an island just out from the San Francisco Bay and built on the 11th of August 1934. It was surrounded by rocks as sharp as knives, water that was ice cold, and some say shark infested. It encaged 1,576 federal inmates, some of the most troublesome inmates from all around the world. The sheer threat of sending a prisoner here would be enough for them to straighten up their behaviour just because of the stories that circulated throughout the rest of the prisons. The island was so isolated from the rest of the world, which meant some of the employees and their families lived there too. During your sentence here at Alcatraz, your day consisted of multiple assigned tasks such as building, sewing, woodwork, laundry and maintenance jobs, which all provided for the military. The prison consisted of 3 stories which centred around the main cell house. It also had attached blocks built up of the warden's office, visitation rooms, the library and the barber shop where you could use your commissary money you earned from your daily jobs assigned. Your new home, aka your cell, was as basic as can be and had zero privacy. A 9-foot rectangle which had a metal frame bed with a mattress only a few inches thick. A metal desk that was bolted to the wall with no visible or easily removable screws. A wash basin and a toilet that was attached to the wall directly beside your bed. As many as 36 prisoners made 14 escape attempts during the 29 years of the prison being open, but only 3 vanished forever. Tonight, we are going all the way back to the very night that they broke out. The 60s. It was an eventful time. It was the years that the flick Bob took over, which inspired Austin Powers, and we finally got to see the first man walking the moon. Kinda, but that's a whole other video. It wasn't all good though. It was the decade that seen the Vietnam War take place, major civil rights protests, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the assassination of the United States President John F. Kennedy, as well as social rights activist Martin Luther King. To conclude, it was the decade that reached an all-time high in crime, and from there on up, it only got worse. People knew that prisons were reaching high capacity, and they never took the law serious until they were surprisingly convicted. But by this time, people tried to keep up that tough persona they had branded for themselves in the outside world, and now with a stint in prison, their personal resume looked so much better, while the newbies decided to swim with the sharks and create a status for themselves. In a place that was full of people trying to fight for top dog status, everyone was willing to do anything to claim it. Some of the prisoners got so out of hand that the prison board actually labelled them as instigators and overall uncontrollable. Alcatraz was a place that was whispered throughout many prisons all over the world. It was a prison that was so harsh in punishment and ran by such brutal authority that sometimes it was the only threat that managed to straighten out the worst behaved. But what about the ones that didn't take it seriously? Well, they were made an example of and sent straight to Alcatraz. Many of the prisoners that were in Alcatraz had so many different reasons for being there. Tonight, we are going to meet 4 of them. Meet Frank Lee Morris, also known as prisoner AZ-1441. To start off with, Frank had such a troubled childhood, which I'm not making excuses, but it's definitely a pattern that relates to so many criminals. You'll find that a lot of the time people that aren't guided very early in life either go down 2 paths, one of them being crime and punishment, or they decide to use their troubled childhood as a way to become better, stronger, and make a life for themselves. Frank, sadly, chose the life of crime and punishment. He was born on September 1st, 1926, in Washington, D.C. By age 11, Frank's mother and father had abandoned him, which led him to spend the next few years in foster homes. By the time Frank was 13, he was convicted of his first crime, which consisted of drug possession and armed robbery. During his time in jail, while being so young, his duties consisted of serving lunch to the prisoners. This would have been a prime time for Frank to realise what his life could have been and stop, but unfortunately, it done nothing of the sort. In the next few years, he managed to rack up quite the crime record after being arrested in Miami Beach for grand larceny, which involved him breaking into and stealing cars. If that wasn't enough, the final nail in the coffin for Frank was the last decision he made as a free man. His criminal behaviour had reached an all-time high when he decided to rob a bank and hold the cashiers up at gunpoint. This landed him time in Florida and Georgia prisons before being moved to the Louisiana State Penitentiary to serve 10 years for his crimes. However, his crimes weren't over. He managed to conduct a plan from inside the prison to escape, and he was successful. For a while. A year to be precise. During this year of Frank being on the run, it proved that old habits died hard because he was actually arrested during a burglary. He now had under his belt 2 runaways, 2 breaking and enterings, 1 burglary, narcotics and armed robbery, and finally, bank robbery. Frank's next stop, a new home for the foreseeable future, Alcatraz. Meet the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence. John was born May 2nd, 1930. While Clarence was born May 11th, 1931. They were just 1 year apart. They grew up in Donaldsonville in Georgia to a family of 13. Their parents, George Robert Anglin and Rachel Van Miller Anglin, were extremely hardworking. They were seasonal farm workers and decided to up and move their family to Ruskin, Florida, where the truck farms and tomato fields became a more sustainable way of living for them. This meant that they were guaranteed an income to help take care of their children. They were all about family, and the children were put to work very, very young. Both brothers were made to work on the farm, and in their mum and dad's mind, this was a way for them to gain morals and appreciation once their hard work paid off. Although, at some point, they decided that the good life of hard working just wasn't for them anymore, and by age 14, Clarence got a taste for trouble after breaking into a service station. From then on, their lives went downhill. The brothers teamed up and decided to start robbing banks and other buildings around town. They seen it as harmless because no one was getting hurt. It was more so becoming for the adrenaline rush, the excitement that comes from getting away with what they were doing. They would wait till night or hit up closed shops such as Target. This meant that there was more of a chance that they would get away with it. Their plan worked for a while, but by 1958, they took it too far. The brothers decided to rob another bank, the Bank of Alabama. This time, they brought a gun. Not a real gun. Whoa. No, not a real gun. Surprisingly though, still a crime. The two were arrested and sentenced to an estimated 15 to 20 years in Florida State Prison, which they actually ended up being moved to Atlanta Penitentiary. The brothers really couldn't help themselves, and they still found ways to break the rules, even behind bars. They made several attempts at escaping, and after being labelled as uncontrollable, they were transferred to, you guessed it, Alcatraz. John and Clarence became inmates AZ-1416 and AZ-1485. Moving on to the last person I'm going to introduce to you guys. Meet Alan West. Alan was born on March 25th, 1929 in New York. He first got arrested at the age of 26 for car theft and was imprisoned in Atlanta Penitentiary, then moved to Florida State Prison. Now, something you should know about Alan is that he isn't actually the brightest person. At this point in his life, he was 28. But he was known to have the mentality and brains of a 14-year-old. Overall, he was arrested about 20 plus times in his life, and just like the others, seeked trouble. One night, Alan decided that he was going to try and make a run for it and escape the Florida prison that he was kept in. He failed, and by 1957, he was immediately transported to Alcatraz. Alan became known as inmate AZ-1335. Now we're familiar with Alcatraz and the inmates that live there, I'm going to take you back just 1 year before the most famous escape in history happened, and you get to be a fly on the wall. You may be wondering how all 4 of these cellmates came to cross paths. The reason? They had adjoining cells. Almost immediately, they started to plan the escape. But all plans need a mastermind, right? That mastermind was Frank. He took full leadership in orchestrating this entire plan. But before we get into it, there's something you should know about Frank, and he is anything but ordinary. His brain worked in many ways that we can't even comprehend. Not because we're stupid, but because he was a genius. His IQ was measured at 133. Those with an IQ above 130 were considered highly gifted and only made up 2% of the population. Frank would take in the world around him completely different because of this. Geniuses are described as being able to memorize and store everything they have ever seen, heard, read, touched, etc., and able to access it instantly. The others, well, they all come into play because they all served time in Atlanta and at some point tried to escape. Basically meaning that they all still had that in them and still wanted to do it. Nobody wanted to get caught. Frank knew that he could either include them in his plan or leave them behind for them to potentially rat him out. He also really couldn't do it without their help. They might not have been the smartest bunch, but he couldn't do it alone. Because of all of this ensured trust, which was key for making this plan successful. The plan, believe it or not, started with something as simple as a spoon. A spoon in which each member stole from the mess hall where everyone ate. At the backside of everyone's cell, directly below the sink, was a vent grill. This was their way out. They sharpened the spoon as much as possible and began to chip away at the wall. However, at some point, the spoon just wouldn't cut it anymore. They began to collect any sharp objects they could find, from discarded saw blades they found around the prison grounds, to even going as far to make their own devices, such as a makeshift drill fashioned from a motor of a vacuum cleaner. Now, in order to not get caught, they had to be super quiet, but chiseling away at a raw concrete wall was going to bounce off every wall in the prison, and this is where the other inmates came into play. As a disguise, Frank would play his accordion during the prison's happy hour of music. This was prime time to dig because the prisoners were at their loudest. Each step so far in the plan was crucial, but within each step was another step. They couldn't miss anything. The cement dust that was coming from the wall as they were digging was super important and would come in extremely handy in their plan later on. So they collected it and stored it somewhere in their prison cell. But they now faced another problem because they now had a huge hole in the prison wall. This had to be covered up because the prison had up to 13 routine checks every single night. They covered this hole up by cutting out cardboard-shaped bricks that blended in with the wall. Behind this cardboard brick was larger chunks of cement as well as a vent that was placed exactly where it was before. Once these holes were dug big enough for each prisoner to fit through, at night time they would crawl through and meet in the utility tunnels directly behind their sink. This is a tight, narrow hallway that runs behind every single cell. It's a place to access all the pipes that lace through the prison. From there, they would climb up the pipes through different levels of the prison, and at the very top, they set up a secret workshop. Over 50 raincoats and other materials were tied together to create a makeshift raft and life preservers, just in case. The only reason that they knew how to make this raft was because of some of the tasks that they were given during their maintenance jobs, and one of them had stumbled across a design in a book during mechanics. The raft that they had built was 6 feet by 14 feet long. It was meticulously sewn by hand and sealed with the steam pipes, the same ones that they climbed up. From there, they then inflated the raft with a concertina, a musical instrument also known as an accordion. The same accordion that Frank used to play during music happy hour. The accordion was also going to be used as a bellow for when they put it in the water to help the raft move. They then created paddles, which was made from scrap wood that they found around the prison, and screws that were easily accessible in the pipe tunnels. I say easily accessible, of course difficult without a screwdriver, but more easy than their cells that were capped. Remember how I said that the many different steps all played a crucial role in making this plan successful? Well, this has really come into play. The cement that the inmates had been gathering was mixed with toothpaste, soap, dust and toilet paper to fashion together a DIY paper mache head, a replica of each of them. They added features from paint they found in maintenance and this bit is so disgusting, but hair that they found in the barber shop from the floor as well as the trash. They gathered together their towels and their clothing and piled it under the sheets to give the illusion that their body was laying there. They were now ready. June 11th, 1962, the night of the escape. With the plan now set in place, all they had to do was waiting on one guard come, and in the space between that one guard coming and the next one, they had to take that window of opportunity to get through the grills. The dummies were in position and each of them paced around their cells until Frank gave the word. Frank then busted the larger weakened chunks of the wall and the grill out and proceeded to climb through to the pipe tunnels. John busted the wall and vent out next and was followed by Clarence. Now, all of them were through except for Alan. But why was he taking so long? He knew that they only had a small amount of time for their plan that just fit. Turns out, when he removed the fake cardboard brick, the larger chunks of cement had solidified, locking the vent grill in place. This was caused by the saltwater dampness from the ocean surrounding Alcatraz. By the time he busted through and re-widened the hole, basically starting all over again, the others had left the tunnels and he began to race after them. But backtracking for a second while Alan was still digging out his vent, the others left the pipe tunnels by climbing up a ventilation shaft to the roof. When they arrived at the top of this ventilation shaft, they busted through the lid and it came crashing down all of the levels, hitting the bottom of the prison floor. And this in turn echoed all through the prison. The guards actually heard this, but had no clue where it was coming from, so they didn't investigate it. The team, excluding Alan, who's still trying to catch up with them, gathered their equipment and carried it with them for the rest of the escape. They then descended 50 feet to the ground by climbing down another pipe shaft past the kitchen. They then climbed not one, but two 12-foot barbed wire fences which led them to the northeast shoreline. This was right beside the power plant that helped to run the prison, but also helped to power their plan, because this was one of the only blind spots in the entire prison. What did this mean? Well, this meant that they were shadows in the night, because none of the gun towers or searchlights could reach this point. They then inflated their makeshift raft and boarded at around 10 PM. Alan, currently climbing up the ventilation shafts above the kitchen, finally reaches the roof, just minutes behind the rest. Crucial minutes. He may not be the smartest, but he knew that he hadn't made it. He now starts to panic because he knows he can't go any further forward because they all have the gear. And once they're gone, they're gone. What's he going to do? So he can either backtrack and make it less worse for himself, but he has to get back in time before the next guard comes. As Alan is backtracking all the steps that he dreamed about for months, the others set sail, never to be seen again. As sunrise came around, a defeated Alan lay in his cell, only to be confronted by the first guard since they returned back in the early hours. The dummies that they had placed were so realistic that for hours every single guard fell for it, until one of them got curious and prodded at the face of Frank. His dummy then rolled off the bed and smashed. They knew. Alan went on to cooperate fully with the police and ended up giving them a detailed description of the entire plan. He knew that his one and only chance of getting out had passed, and if he didn't cooperate, it was only going to get worse for him. As a result for cooperating, he was basically only given a slap on the wrist and was given no further punishments or extended time. The guards knew that Alan wasn't smart enough to conduct a plan of this magnitude and ended up just taking pity on him. Now you're probably wondering what actually happened to the gang. Well, after they set sail, they were never seen again, but clues left behind told a completely different story. The military and law got involved and they done an extensive 10-day search over air, sea and land. On June 14th, the Coast Guard stumbled across a paddle floating about 200 yards off the southern shoreline of Angel Island. On the same day, and roughly close to where the paddle was found, a crew member from another ship found a wallet wrapped in plastic. Inside was the names, addresses and photos of the Anglins' family and friends. On June 21st, shreds of the raincoat raft were found not far from the Golden Gate Bridge. The next day, just 50 yards away from Alcatraz Island, a prison boat picked up a deflated life jacket made from the same material as the raft. To this day, no one knows if the men actually survived the rocky, shark-infested waters that surrounded Alcatraz. The FBI's final report states that the gang's raft was never found. They truly believe that they drowned. But there's some holes in this story. They said the individuals' personal effects were the only belongings they had, and the men would have drowned before leaving them behind. However, maybe the men knew that they couldn't use the same ID, wallets, other personal belongings. They were all now clues, and once they left Alcatraz, that would have been a given if anybody seen them. If they were going to start a new life, they had to ditch everything that was relating to their past life. To me, that kind of seems like common sense, but maybe the police are taking it from a different direction that I just can't work out. And then there's the fact that they were dealing with a genius, remember? Maybe Frank decided that they were to dump everything in the ocean to give the appearance that they drowned or were eaten by sharks. The lead officer, Patrick Mahoney, who ran the search, said, "I felt that they didn't make it, but I thought we'd find a body. We didn't find a body." Just to give you guys some odds, it's a known fact that 2 out of 3 people that go missing in the San Francisco Bay are found. Now that's saying something because 3 of these people vanished. During the investigation, a man named Robert Chiche, a San Francisco police officer, said that at around 1 a.m. on the morning of June 12th, he seen an illegal boat close to Alcatraz. A few minutes later, that boat left under the Golden Gate Bridge, never to be seen again, and nobody knows what it was even doing there. At the time, Robert thought nothing of this, but once he heard the news of the inmates, which word travelled fast, he then became suspicious, and he thought that the inmates had arranged this pickup somehow from inside the prison. Unfortunately though, Robert's theory was just dismissed. This was due to the FBI believing and going for what the men were in prison for, that if they had made it to mainland, they would have probably broken into and stolen a car and escaped that way, and because no car was reported stolen or broken into, they just assumed that they died in the waters. Even though there was no bodies that were found, there was just more that was supporting that they had drowned rather than arranged a pickup. July 17th, 1962. A month after the escape. A Norwegian ship by the name of SS Northfield came across the gruesome discovery of a body floating in the water, just 15 miles off of the Golden Gate Bridge. Now they didn't report that body until that October, and by that time, the body was gone. There was doubt that it was one of the inmates because of the amount of time that had passed. Yes, it had only been a month, but by this time, the body would either have been eaten by sharks, another fish, and bacteria, or have sank. A coroner came to the conclusion that it was the body of a Cecil Herman, a 34-year-old unemployed ex-baker who committed suicide just 5 days before the discovery. Here is where the story gets even more confusing. Just 8 months after the escape, human bones were discovered under the Golden Gate Bridge, close to where that Norwegian ship seen the body in the first place. The bones were recovered and studied, and it was said that they matched someone the exact same age and height as Frank. But overall, they couldn't prove this. The bones were buried under a completely different name, sealing the fate of the waters versus someone. Throughout the years, this story has baffled millions, and from here on, it's only going to get more intriguing. Let's talk about the possible sightings of the inmates. Just 1 year after the escape, a lawyer by the name of Eugenia McGowan received a phone call. On the other end was a man claiming to be John and requesting a meeting with the US Marshal's office. When McGowan refused to meet with this unknown caller, the line went dead. Again, the FBI stepped in and dismissed this as just some silly prank call. However, this was not the end of the many tips that were given in throughout the years. January 1965, 3 years after the escape. The FBI were sent in a tip that Clarence was living in Brazil, so they investigated. The tips were so detailed that agents were actually sent to South America to investigate and track him down, but nothing came up. In another incident with tips being given in 1967, a man called in and told the FBI that himself and Frank were long-time buddies. They even went to school together and had known each other for 30 years. Continuing with the call, he then went on to say that he had not long just bumped into Frank in the mainland and described him as having a small beard and a mustache. After that, he refused to give any more information and hung up. Now this could be one of 3 things in my opinion. 1. This could be someone just trying to gain some power and steer such a large investigation in their direction, aka knowing nothing about it and needs to get a life. Or 2, this could really be Frank's longtime friend who phoned in to do the right thing, but as he started telling the memories and kind of reliving it, the guilt crept up in him and he decided to just hang up and not put his friend in any more trouble. Or it could be 3. Maybe this was Frank's longtime friend of 30 plus years, and he'd been put in place as a decoy so that the police would be distracted of Frank's real whereabouts. Just throwing this out there, and this is all speculation, but maybe he was part of Frank's genius plan all along and had more roles in it than anybody thinks. Maybe he was even the one that helped steer the ship that was under the Golden Gate Bridge that helped the inmates escape. I'm just throwing that out there like the inmates done with their belongings overboard, allegedly. These tips even go as far as family members getting involved. Now, as I said before, the Anglin brothers grew up in a huge family, and the brothers that weren't in prison and didn't escape, they often received postcards and messages. And one time, one of these postcards come through and it said, "From Joe," and the other one said, "From Joe and Jerry." The family also received Christmas cards that when opened read, "To Mother, Love John, Merry Christmas." Further on in this investigation, the police took previous Christmas cards that the Anglin brothers had wrote before their prison sentence and matched them with these new cards that were coming through. And it turns out the handwriting was a perfect match. Another member of the Anglin's family, Brother Robert, said that sometimes they would receive phone calls and on the other end was just someone breathing. Could this have actually been the brothers just wanting to hear one of their family members' voice? Robert then went on to say, I suppose all of that could have been pranks, but maybe it was my brothers. John and Clarence's mother was also contacted. Every single Mother's Day, she was sent flowers until her death in 1973. On the day of her funeral, the family recall two very tall, strange women in very heavy makeup showing up and then vanishing. Federal officials say that between the years 1963 and into the 1970s, there were 7 sightings reported of the Anglin brothers, all in North Florida or Georgia. Robert also went on to say that in 1989, when their father passed away, 2 strange men with beards showed up to the funeral home, and this is how he described them. They stood in front of the casket looking at the body for a few minutes. They wept, then they walked out. While we're on this point, later on in the investigation, the father was dug up and a DNA sample was taken to see if it matched the unidentified body that was found and then buried. And it did not, which meant it wasn't one of the Anglin brothers. Also, in 1989, a woman named Kathy called into the Unsolved Mysteries helpline and said that she had recognised a photo of Clarence once the episode aired. She claimed he lived on a farm in Marianna, Florida. The brothers were also linked to this area by another female caller who called in and said the exact same story, except this time she could give details such as eye colour, height and other physical features, which all turned out to be correct. From both of those leads, the police then went on to interview another witness, and this witness could identify a police sketch and said that it bore a striking resemblance to someone she knew. Another story that could possibly be true is told by an 89-year-old man named Bud Morris. He went on to claim that he was a cousin of Frank's, and about 9 times a couple of months before the escape, he had delivered an envelope of cash to the guards at Alcatraz, which he now believes was a bribe to help the men escape. After that, he continued by saying that he met with his cousin in San Diego not long after the escape. His daughter was also interviewed, and she was only 9 years old at the time, and she recalls being in the park with her dad and dad's friend Frank. But they both went on to say that they had no idea about this escape. His story and claims, even the part about being related to Frank, has never been proven. Now I know that I've already said that some people love to steer certain cases in a different direction and gain power, but would they really go as far as to include their 9-year-old little daughter? I don't know about that. And also, why would you deliver money to Alcatraz guards and then claim you had no idea about the escape? You don't think there's something suspicious about that? Because, like, I do. I don't buy that part of the story. I think that maybe he wanted to grass this person in, but didn't want to incriminate himself. I don't know. The whole situation is pretty sus, which is maybe why the police just didn't buy it. Now, I know that so many of you will be as confused as can be by now, but this next part is definitely going to leave you thinking. A man named Fred Brizzi, who grew up with the brothers, said that he had recognised them in Rio de Janeiro in 1975. Just another tale that could possibly be true, possibly not. You know, we've just heard enough of them, right? Well, the only difference with this one is Fred could produce photographic evidence. The pictures showed 2 men who, according to him, were John and Clarence standing next to a large termite mound, while others showed the brothers on land that their farm sat on. Ring a bell? However, the wife of Fred went on to discredit these stories, and she said that in her entire life, she had never once heard Fred mention either of these brothers. The police then done some digging, and it was discovered that Fred was a known con artist and drug dealer, and he was also known for making things up, which meant his story wasn't reliable. After really researching into this, it was proven by forensic experts that the photos were taken in 1975 and they had a high chance of actually being the brothers. But how could this be? Because I thought the detectives were so sure that they drowned. Because of Fred's story, this opened up an entirely different alternative escape plan. According to him, the inmates did not use their raft to swim, and in fact, they used it as a floating device. They got in the water and paddled round to the back of the island to where the boat docks were. Then, from there, they stole an old, unused electrical cable, which was actually reported missing the night of the escape. How would he know this? They then tied the cord to a boat that was actually leaving the prison that night and were dragged to mainland. From there, they then untied themselves and got on a boat that waited for them under the Golden Gate Bridge, the same boat that Robert the policeman reported. In the early 2000s, a US Marshal received an anonymous tip that the Anglin brothers were in Brazil, a claim they had previously been given and investigated. When they arrived back in Brazil, they interviewed a local bartender, and he confirmed that at some point he had served one of the brothers. Throughout the years, there has been many different ways to either prove that they drowned or escaped. In an attempt to try and settle this never-ending debate, there was a few studies done, and in one of them, a replica of the raft was made. While this study was being conducted, the raft actually ended up failing, which, if that was the case, on the very night of the escape, it meant that the men would have ended up in the water. And if any of you guys have ever heard this story, so many people say if they had ended up in the water, they would have died. Now, to try and debunk that theory, a professional swimmer was brought in, and he was tested to try and make it from Alcatraz to the mainland. And he made it, which just goes to show it can be done. Now, you're probably thinking at this point in the video, you have heard all of the theories. You would be wrong, because in 2011, the case was re-examined with a fresh pair of eyes. Going back to the fact that they never found a raft, apparently this information was kept on the down low to stay ahead of the inmates. But supposedly, they did find a raft, and there was footprints leading away from it. It was also reported that a 1955 blue Chevrolet had been broken into and stolen the day after the escape. It was also reported that at around 11:30 AM on June 12th, a driver in Stockton, California, just 80 miles east of San Francisco, reported to the California Highway Patrol that he had just been driven off the road by 3 men in a blue Chevrolet. After the FBI got word of this situation, it was clear that this story was not new news, as it had been reported in the newspapers at the time. This led them to believe that there was some sort of cover-up to protect the reputation of Alcatraz being the only prison in the world that no one could escape. So there you guys have it. This case is so confusing because every single time someone come along with some valid point, someone else debunked it and changed the entire direction of the investigation. I personally think that the men did escape and they done it using their original plan. However, once they reached the Golden Gate Bridge, I don't know whether they broke into the car or they got on a boat and disappeared, because there's 2 very valid points there. I also think the fact this story sounds so unbelievable is kind of what makes it possible for me. There has to be some sort of percentage of what if? This entire plan was carried out by a genius, and along the way, didn't really sound like he made many mistakes, so the odds of them getting away, in my personal opinion, are pretty high. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Of course, these people are criminals and it would have been amazing if they were caught, but please let me know what you think in the comments below. Try and make sense of it for me because it's a confusing one. Did they get away with it? Or did they die? This is a Weird World, and this was Escaping Alcatraz. I'll hopefully see you guys in my next video. Bye!